If someone had said to you in December that by April, millions of people all over the world would be infected with a mysterious new virus that has no vaccine, you'd think they were talking about a Hollywood script.
Breaking developments in the coronavirus pandemic. The death toll rising in the U.S., more than 60 dead.
Doctors on the front lines in Italy with an ominous warning tonight, calling this the apocalypse and telling the world to get ready.
No one is immune to the COVID-19 virus. It threatens all of us.
A reality is, quote, a new normal.
Americans are facing a new normal.
It is a new normal.
Working toward a new normal.
Which is a new normal.
You may be having dinner with a waiter wearing gloves, maybe a face mask.
Establishing some kind of new normal.
Embrace the new normals of social distancing.
When we get out of the sort of new normal and get to a new normal.
The new normal.
The new normal.
This new normal is
a new normal.
Or the new normal.
The new normal.
Let's find a new normal.
Be a new normal.
This is likely to be the new norm.
A new normal.
This is our new normal.
Into our new normal.
The new normal.
Will be the new normal.
So it's not going to be return to normal. People will have to realize this is not going to go away anytime soon.
And it won't be normal until we get an amazing vaccine to the entire world.
The hard fact is, until we find a vaccine, going back to normal means putting lives at risk.
It means zero tolerance. So every time we see a case, we basically pounce on it. We do everything we can then to shut it down, and we will have to keep doing that on an ongoing basis, and yes, until a vaccine arises.
We can anticipate that we will continue like this for some time until an effective vaccine is widely available.
Normality, as it was before, will not come back full on until we get a vaccine for this. And as you say, that could be a very long way off.
The weeks ahead, some argue even in the months ahead. It is a long way off. And unless and until that vaccine is developed and then administered to every single Victorian, we will have to live with and embrace a COVID normal.
You'd think they were talking about a Hollywood script.
Mr. Zuckerberg, I will say there are a great many Americans who I think are deeply concerned that Facebook and other tech companies are engaged in a pervasive pattern of bias and political censorship.
Now, the Constitution prohibits the government from censoring much of the speech that we've come to know and love, but Facebook is imposing its own Silicon Valley brand of political correctness on its own social media platform.
And now it is happening. Google is acting directly to shape what people can say and what they're allowed to speak. It's a direct effort to stifle free speech.
There's been much debate this past year about freedom of speech and social media.
We should err on the side of greater expression.
They are literally spreading lies, misinformation, propaganda.
The companies that engage in censoring or any political conduct will not be able to keep their liability shield.
Don't you think people should be able to have information to make an informed choice?
Congressman, I do. And that's why we don't stop people from posting on their page something that's wrong. Right? If someone wants to post vaccine, anti-vaccination content, or if they want to join a group where people are discussing that content, we don't prevent them from doing that. But what we do is we don't go out of our way to make sure that our group recommendation systems try to show people or encourage people to join those groups.
Hey guys, we're the creators of this film, and our intention of speaking to all these people and creating this documentary is to shed light on the censorship that has been going on and is going on way more now than ever throughout this pandemic, as we're all relying on the mainstream media as our source of information to find some truth in all this madness, when a lot of it is being silenced and pushed under the rug. And so we're just regular people. We have a camera, we know how to use it, we know how to edit, we have a bus, so we're like, we can't sit at home and do what we're told. We're gonna go out and we're gonna listen to these people's stories and just try and share their message and their truth, because this is what's happening behind the scenes, and unless you have the time and the energy to go and seek this information, it will not come to you. Most of these people invited us into their homes. Some of them we stayed the night, others we shared meals with. These are real people, real connection, real interactions, and that's just what this is. We want to share with you real people's truth and stories. So the rest is up to you.
So we hope you enjoy this film. Watch it with an open mind, open your heart, and try to listen and hear the truth that are coming from these people, because it's being silenced. And if it's being silenced, that means it's being silenced for a reason, and because maybe what they're saying is truth. So please enjoy and have an open mind. You would agree then that the mainstream information, I guess as well as the alternative, but mainly the mainstream source of media would have a huge role in the public's perspective on these world topics that was.
Well, it's interesting what I was talking about before with new social media networks popping up in retaliation or in balance of the ones that are imposing censorship. You know, I heard YouTube recently says that they're going to ban any topics that talk about vitamin C and turmeric as healthy ingredients. Fantastic. They've played that card in public, and people are looking at that going, that doesn't make sense. Why would they do that? So all of a sudden a new platform will emerge that allows that freedom of speech. So when we talk about mainstream media, our traditional news channels, they're showing their hand over and over and over and over and over again.
Many people believe that there is true journalism in this country, and in fact around the world, that independent researchers go out, they see all different sides of the story, and they give us the information. When people look a little bit more deeply, they find out that the media is owned by 6 major corporations that obviously have to respond to shareholders, and also influenced by politics and corporations to have a certain agenda. And the average person doesn't realize that the media is shaping their every thought and intention.
You know, because the whole society is ruled by people's perception. You know, as you control people's perception, what they believe reality to be, then you control the behaviour of the people, because according to what they believe reality to be. So they use the media to do that. So the media is running the whole show, really. The media can make or break any politician, can make or break any country, can cause you to go to war, want to go to war with another country, can cause you to believe another country is a terrible country of terrorists that wants to come and invade you when you've never even been there. The media tells you it's so, and just people go, oh, it's okay then, we have to go and bomb them.
You got pretty much 2 distinct categories. You got the people who know that almost every single thing in the media, especially if it's mainstream media and it's international mainstream media, whatever they're saying, then probably the opposite is true. It's usually all just a lie. Then you got the majority of the population that just think that everything that they see in the media is the truth, it's real, and it's for their best interests. Because they are the majority, then 100% the media, the mass media, is definitely influencing and affecting the way the general population thinks about things.
The media plays a bigger role than government does. Again, the Murdoch media, they started a campaign about 2015 called No Jab, No Play. That came out in all of the Murdoch medias around Australia, the Courier Mail, all of these different newspapers, basically saying that if you didn't vaccinate, your children shouldn't be allowed to play with other children who were vaccinated. So it is the media that is actually leading the government into legislation, not the other way around.
They've created the perfect storm because, you know, so many people who buy into what the mainstream tells them will believe that people like you or I should be rounded up if we refuse the test or the vaccination because we may be infectious. And they'll be okay with us being rounded up because they think it's being done to protect them. And all you need is the media to sell it to them.
It's just unbelievable. It's unbelievable, the headlines, the content of the articles, you know. When there is absolutely nothing in any article that empowers the sovereign beings in this country, forget it, it's just absolute waste of time.
I can't trust them. I'm sorry, I just can't even trust what they say. I used to be an avid media reader. I used to buy the papers. I would buy them every day, many times too, and I'd read them. I wanted to find out what was happening in the world, but I've stopped because they are not genuine reporters anymore. They don't report on events and give you this unbiased, just a critical analysis of what happened. It's all commentary. They have their opinions. So you can buy this paper because it's a left wing, this is because it's a right wing.
Who gives the media money? The government. You're a client. I want you to do this, and no worries, I'll do it. It's going to cost you $30 million. There you go, here's $30 million. I mean, it's right in front of us. COVID-19, $30 million on advertising. I'll do whatever you want for $30 million, not a problem. I'll lie as much as you want.
The media industry's changed a lot. I mean, 15 years ago it was quite possible to run around as a journalist and write stories, as long as they were stories that would sell. What role do they play? I'd say they're becoming more irrelevant. I mean, most people still, jump onto the evening news or listen to their breakfast radio host, and they're still massively influential. But they're fighting for that relevance, and the way they're fighting for that relevance is by appealing to the mainstream.
Media, it seems to twist the things how they want to portray it, and they can make it look good, or they can make it look bad.
What's your perspective on freedom of speech and choice in Australia, and do you think people have it here?
Not anymore. We did to a degree, but it's fast being eroded. People are being deplatformed. Certain people who may say things that the government doesn't like aren't even allowed to enter the country anymore.
I don't. It's been taken away from me. It's very hard for me because it is, I believe, my calling in life is to help.
We have freedom of speech in some areas, but there are taboo topics like vaccines and so on. You're not allowed to speak about those. The media was, censoring that. So we have a very partial freedom of speech. Freedom of choice. Well, I mean, freedom of choice, it's all about consent, isn't it? Now, consent is really a fundamental right. It's been enshrined in all sorts of traditions and laws, the Nuremberg principles and so on. And in medicine too, the right of consent and the right to be informed properly in order to consent in an informed way is recognised legally. The vaccine industry has started to pervert this, and so coercion is being brought in, not respecting the freedom of choice.
I think the average person in Australia believes that this is a pretty reasonable country, that we've got the government there to look after us. We've got a few bad apples probably, but on the whole, it's a pretty free place to live in. However, I think 2020 has shown people that freedom of speech and freedom of movement and freedom of thought is increasingly being impinged upon. And I think people are a little bit, not lazy in Australia, we're too comfortable. It'll be all right, mate, sort of thing is the attitude, which means that people don't imagine for a moment that their freedom is being taken away. People are there doing good things for us. And I think the water has to get pretty hot before people realise that maybe that's not in people's best interest.
We must be free to express our thoughts at all time. If we do not have the freedom to say what we feel, as long as there's a limit here, it's a fine line between openly saying how you feel and openly attacking somebody.
Australians have never really had free speech on any legislated level. I mean, Australia's a very unique country. We don't have a Bill of Rights. So, I mean, our rights to speech are basically a conglomeration of what is not taken away rather than a right in the first place. As far as how much choice we have in Australia, you can choose some things in Australia. I mean, you certainly can't choose not to vote in Australia. You have to go to the polling booth. You can choose not to vote. It'll cost you money. The state will fine you.
No, I don't think we have freedom of either choice or speech. Under current legislation, parents have to either vaccinate fully or they don't get certain payments from the government. They are not able to send their children to preschool or childcare, and they are not treated the same way as any other parent is. We are openly suppressed by the media, by the government, and by most mainstream medical authorities. They want to be able to stop us from speaking, and they're doing everything in their power to do so.
In order to get rid of free speech altogether, we're being told that free speech, is not good because it hurts people. And no, it doesn't. As long as the person that is expressing his thoughts does it in a responsible way.
There's no freedom of choice in Australia. No, there's censorship, and I think it's been driven by vested interests across the board. And I think we need a lot more transparency, a lot more public discussion.
What is happening now has been this almost invisible erosion of freedom of choice, because we're just presented with one story. There's only one narrative, and you can't question it, or else you're a heretic, or you're an anti-this, or you're an anti-that. And so because this narrative has become so strong, we don't have choice. There isn't choice anymore. It's just this. And so people haven't even noticed that they have lost their freedom of choice.
Isn't the country, wasn't it originally built upon the premise, and I don't get into politics and I think they're all wankers and it's just a scam, but the fact of the matter is you've got the opposition and the government. You're supposed to have an alternate point of view. Isn't that one of the premises of this democracy that we've got, that you have an alternate and opposing view, balanced discussion, not an argument, a debate, and you're supposed to move forward with it, and you don't have that.
Well, I find that day by day and at an increasingly accelerating rate that we're losing freedoms every moment. Unfortunately, Australia is going backwards, in my opinion, with regards to freedom of speech, choices in all walks of life, whether that be education, whether it be health choices, whether it be environment. And even though on paper it may look like you still have choice, the coercion and the bullying that is eminent and also existing right now around these issues forces people into situations that they don't wish to be.
And I think our freedoms get stripped more and more, every year there seems to be more things that are passing through legislation without referendums, without the people's consent.
We valued freedom as paramount and our personal safety as secondary. Now we've been fed that the mantra of safety overrides freedom. We've had it all tipped up the wrong way around. So now we're all scurrying around like scared rats, worrying about our own personal safety, ready to kill or dob in or do something against anybody that threatens my personal safety, and throwing their freedom out. Take our freedom. But we must have safety at any cost.
You've got to sort of really have a look at what they're doing to the freedom of speech and the freedom of movement and all of our liberties in this country. COVID, but they've taken away all of our liberties apart from the right to breathe, and they even want to tax that. They're slowly going to say to us, oh, we're going to ease the restrictions. Who the fuck are you to ease restrictions? Who are you to put them in place? This corporate state has no legitimacy on this continent.
I looked at all that past, as I said before, and I looked at the freedom that we thought we had, where it was voted 1967, I think it was, where it was voted for us to be a citizen of this country. And which I thought was freedom, but it wasn't, because every time we marched in this city of Sydney, a lot of it, the cops would get us, pull us off, and throw us into a paddy wagon, put us into the cell, and bash hell out of us. Kick our guts out, hit us with batons and that, just because we were speaking about our rights. We were speaking our freedom, that we wanted land rights. Your freedom of your rights, it's only written on paper. And I know damn well that we haven't got freedom of rights in this country today. Because when I look and I see that the argument is now going on about these forced vaccines, and And I can't understand why they have to vaccinate a little newborn baby whose little body is not even functioning there and then. And they say that we have democratic rights. Jesus. I never had any schooling, but I don't know what I know what this is supposed to mean. It's supposed to mean that we can refuse what we don't have to have. That's our democratic rights. I still say to them today, bullshit. You have a right. I say, bullshit. We're supposed to have it. We're supposed to have our rights. But something else is saying no. Hierarchy is saying no. You see, Aboriginal people haven't got credibility in this country. It's zilch. It's appalling. If we said that place was sacred over there, you know, across the river. If I sat there and I was telling a lot of politicians or something, you can't develop over there because that place is sacred over there. And the first thing that they would do, then they would go and they would look to see what was sacred about it. Or they would try and bring the sacredness down. You know, and they say, well, so what's sacred about it? They're trying to look for that sacredness, see? You can't see sacredness. You can't see spirituality. But you can feel it, you can live it, and you can have it. And that's the same as sacredness. And people just can't understand that. You know, so again,
we stand up, we don't slow down when tyranny is all around. In the cities and every town, we must break through this lockdown.
Channel 7's celebrity chef Pete Evans has often spruiked some crackpot ideas about vaccinations and all sorts of weird dieting methods. The My Kitchen Rules host has often made people pretty angry with these antics over the years.
I've been called outspoken, called controversial.
Controversial chef Pete Evans has been axed from TV as he doubles down on spruiking alternative health remedies and dangerous conspiracy theories online. The Australian Medical Association stated, "We're getting a little tired of saying this, but please don't follow advice from Pete Evans, especially if he's suggesting you gaze into the sun." Pete's also been a strong crusader in conspiracy circles. In 2014, he claimed the modern Australian diet was behind the rise in autism. In 2019, he promoted an anti-vaccination podcast. And in 2017, he warned his followers about fluoride in public water, equating it to poison.
My name is Pete Evans, and I'm a human being. Most people would recognise me from being a chef on mainstream television over the last 20 years, and also being a cookbook author.
Do you believe that people are being silenced and ridiculed by the media in Australia for just speaking their perspective on world topics?
It's an interesting question. I've been involved in mainstream media as what I would call a player in that space for the last 2 decades. I haven't been silenced. Some people might say that I have been ridiculed or painted in a certain way or portrayed in a certain way to create a sensational headline. And once you understand the game or the job of that entertainment writer or opinion writer, then you understand that they're just fulfilling their job title. At the end of the day, that is what they're doing. They're creating modern day entertainment in the disguise or the guise of news. So where does the investigative journalism that I grew up with, that I always considered was factual, searching for the truth, and where does opinion, editorial, or judgment come into place? And what I've been seeing over the last 5 to 10 years is more of this merging where it becomes blurred. And if you don't have your eyes open, or you can't think critically, how can you decide what is actually the facts, what is investigative journalism, and what is just pure entertainment? I can't control anyone's perspective of me or perception of me. It's not who I am. Anybody can think anything they like of me, and that's called free will. I encourage people to have their perspectives or perceptions of me, whether I deem them positive or negative, or they deem them positive or negative. It's, I'm not here to protect anyone, to save anybody, to do anything other than me express my authentic self. The media can portray me in any which way they choose fit to do so. I don't judge them. I see them and I understand them, and I'm just a human being searching for answers just like them. Except maybe I ask different questions.
Yeah, anything that goes against the grain of the narrative that is being put onto the population, then 100% you're silenced.
Are you being silenced or ridiculed, or know anyone personally being silenced or ridiculed for speaking out?
Both. Yeah, both, yeah. So I've been pretty much, anybody that wants to see my stuff on Facebook or YouTube would have to go directly to my page. It won't turn up on feeds. Subscribers have been messaging me saying that they subscribe, and when I put my new videos out, they don't see them, so they're asking where they are.
And YouTube and the censorship, they're censoring out anything that isn't the main narrative. And even when you look at the fact checkers that they use, like Google and Facebook, it's a company that's part of the same organization. So it's all just one big smokescreen, to shut any independent thought about this and shut the truth about what's going on and stop it getting out to people. I've been deplatformed on Facebook, I've been deplatformed on Spotify. So many of my YouTube videos have been deleted in the last few weeks as well. Well, folks, they did it to me. They deleted my YouTube channel. 13 years of my life's work gone with the click of a mouse.
We copped this censorship back in 2015. We were told, stop talking. Don't tell people what's going on. So we did. We stopped. Ultimately, we got forced to stop. It was extremely bad for our health. I had to enter into an agreement with a number of the agencies, a written agreement, not to speak further in public. So basically the information that I was providing was never proven to be incorrect in any way, shape or form. In fact, it was all the complete opposite. So when we entered into that agreement, essentially the ATO wiped me out, made me a bankrupt, at the time. And again, it's a system title. Give it what you like. I have no issue with the current status, but it's they wiped me out completely from financially to they thought emotionally and spiritually and all the rest of it. But it didn't. That doesn't happen to someone like myself or Gunham, or someone who's motivated by a challenge.
I decided in 2015 that I would start a political party because I contacted every mainstream political party and even some of the minor parties. What were they going to do about this terrible no jab, no pay legislation that was coming up? And they were all, oh no, vaccines are important, and they were terrified of touching it. Even a few parties that once we had got talking a bit felt it was bad policy, were not willing to step out and take any public position on it because they said it was a vote loser. And I thought, really? Really, I'm sure there must be a lot of people out there that are very distressed about this. The current name of the political party is the Informed Medical Options Party. And we contested the last federal elections. We contested seats in the Senate in Western Australia, New South Wales, Queensland, and also House of Reps. We contested a seat in the Northern Rivers. Since I've embarked on that, I've been gobsmacked at the level of persecution that has come our way. Like, it's supposed to be a free and democratic country where we can have an opinion and bring them out into the public arena. They've come after our business. I've been under investigation on this business just through this. My wife, who's never hurt a person in her life, who's been travelling the world and in Australia helping people with their health, has now been struck off and banned. I've been pulled up in the street driving my car, being told that I've abducted a child. I was interrogated at Newcastle Airport as having a child abducted that was in my car. I said, my car's out there, have a look. I couldn't believe it. Of course, there was nothing. The police apologised. They said we had some very, very strong complaints of good information that you were guilty of this child abduction. Anyway, the whole thing came to nothing. Currently, we've been investigated by the ACNC. They said that we're tax frauds. This is just a nonsense.
And it was, I think it was 2018, I was asked to give a lecture at an anti-vaccination rally, and I spoke on the 8 laws of health, which is pure air, sunshine, take nothing that hurts, exercise, water, proper diet, trust in divine power. They are the 8 laws. The week after that, my husband told me that he noticed that that there were people asking for volunteers to take me down because I'd spoken at that rally. It was probably only a couple of months after that the Healthcare Complaints Commission contacted us and said they'd had some complaints about me, and I was to respond to that. When we saw the complaints, Michael and I laughed. They were so insignificant. It was putting an apple in a net bag for a baby to suck on, and they claimed that the baby might choke on the net bag, and that I advised if a woman can't breastfeed to give goat's milk. They claimed that that was potentially lethal. The claims were ludicrous. We actually didn't take them serious. But the Healthcare Complaints Committee, they decided that they were worthy of investigation, and so I remember I was in Botswana at an education conference at the time. I was one of the speakers there, and I got the message from Michael that I'd been put under investigation. So all of 2019 I was really under investigation, or most of that time. And when you're under the investigation, you're basically banned. You cannot speak, you cannot give health lectures. So as you can imagine, this was devastating to our work in our health retreat. I used to spend 3 hours a day answering emails. All of that had to stop because I was unable to give any advice in Australia. What would happen if I did? They said I would have 12 months jail if I gave any advice. I can't remember the time. I think it was about June or July 2019. I was called to a tribunal where they questioned me for several hours. It was fairly grueling. I felt it went quite well. Our lawyer and Michael, they sat either side of me. They were forbidden to speak. They were forbidden to speak to me. It was quite amazing. And at the end, the lawyer said to Michael and I, this is after the meeting, she said, I'm astonished. She said, they've got nothing on you. She said, is that it? Michael said, does that mean Barbara will be released from the ban? She said, oh no, she'll get a life ban. Because if she was guilty, she'd be fined. And so it's a life ban that I'm forbidden to speak in Australia. I'm forbidden to give any health advice.
No, I haven't been shut down, but I mean, I've lived a life as a freelance journalist and an editor where you're constantly being shut down. Not only are they not buying your stories, is they're not of relative interest or aren't on a certain issue. When you're in a job as an editor, you have to, conform to a certain narrative. So self-censorship's actually the big danger of media, because you know a certain narrative doesn't run in your publication, or you're paid to write a certain way. You certainly don't bother writing those stories. It's a great consideration of good journalists is, am I self-censoring here? You know, should I be writing this story? And of course you write the story, well, it might not get published anyway, because they say, well, we're not covering that.
The Friends of Science in Medicine, a very potent organisation, which are affiliated with people in the New South Wales Medical Board. They certainly have weaponised the Healthcare Complaints Commission to shut down any resistance to saying, look, hang on, what's going on here? So certainly I think nurses, doctors, naturopaths, anyone now can be complained to. Even if their patient hasn't complained, they can be reported to the Healthcare Complaints Commission and find themselves reprimanded, punished. In my case, I was suspended on very unjust terms, you know, just to shut the conversation down. I think it was early October of 2017, after I spoke out against the no jab, no play legislation.
Where did you speak out?
Well, I met at Martin Place.
Okay.
And I spoke out and I spoke to this evidence which I provided to, I wrote by registered mail to Professor Brendan Murphy in Canberra, to Minister Hunt in Canberra, Minister Hazzard in Sydney Parliament, the Minister for Health here. I sent by registered mail my letter of concern to the President of the AMA, both federal, state and territories, and also the CEO of the NHMRC by registered mail. So they all received a letter with my concerns. I was pulled into a mental health hearing which went for 4.5 hours, and they said, among other things, you're obsessional, you're perfectionistic, you have a focal thought disorder, and you may be pre-psychotic. So they said, come back and speak to us in 6 or 12 months when your thoughts have settled down. Well, I still believe the same thing. And so this is severe, unjust censorship, and I've got nowhere to go with that. So I retired.
Yeah.
Because I was frankly just exhausted by the process.
Yeah.
And you know,
who's involved in that? Like what authorities had suspended you and told you you were actually pre-psychotic?
Well, this is the New South Wales Medical Council.
So
yes.
They need to be questioned.
Well, I think that's. I'm just going to have to leave it there.
The censorship comes from your friends. You want people to die. What? Just because I'm suggesting there may be another way? Like it was social shaming for questioning the status quo. I've had constant ridicule since, getting involved with 5G, tinfoil hatter, you anti, whatever. I did have a complaint lodged against me to the Healthcare Complaints Commission a few weeks back. I presume it's relating to my perspectives on the draconian lockdown during COVID and potentially my 5G stuff too. I asked them, well, what's the complaint about? They wouldn't give me details. They couldn't tell me who it was who complained about me, but it was for my viewpoints.
So I found out what the contents of the complaint were last week when I was told that the issue had been taken to the Nursing and Midwifery Council. I received an email telling me to come in for a counselling session. So I had a look at the complaint, and it's basically somebody's opinion and a bunch of accusations with no evidence to back them up. Things such as she has a complete disregard for evidence-based medicine. She promotes anti-vaccination viewpoints. She encourages potentially dangerous quackery such as Reiki. And this one tops the lot. She goes to and speaks at 5G rallies. It appears here that I am guilty until I prove my innocence because I've been asked to attend a counselling session. So I have a barrister on board and we're going to do this together. However, I have just found out this week that after my appearance in the Four Corners exploring 5G, I've had another 3 complaints lodged against me. So things are going to be a bit tough for me, I think, from now onwards.
If you start putting anything on Facebook about the facts about vaccines, the facts about coronavirus, the facts about pedophiles in government, that little boy will turn you off. He'll get his piece. No, that's against our community standards. You're not allowed to expose pedophiles. That goes against our community standards. You're not allowed to expose people that poison children. That goes against our community standards.
And when people like myself and yourself and your lovely partner over here and all, you know, people that wake up, it's okay for free speech to step in and be called a racist and a Looney Tune and mentally unstable, or I take drugs, you know. That's okay, and Facebook is renowned for it. I defended myself for being called a pedophile. I see all children as my children, every single child, you know. And when I defended myself, and I was banned on Facebook because I insulted somebody for I was defending myself. This person just came out of nowhere. And when I defended myself on Facebook, I was the one, she didn't, I did. And it's all the same. Every single person that has been censored, has been banned, has the same beliefs as we do. Our belief in ourselves that we need to live our own life.
Rupert Murdoch's newspapers and television stations are amongst the most vile when it comes to this. We've been called dummy mummies, we've been called stupid, uncaring. I've been called the baby killer of Bangalow because I simply believe that people should have a right to make a choice. These sorts of things shouldn't be allowed in a society. That's hate speech according to anyone, and yet it's applauded by the government and the mainstream medical community. And as I said before, we simply don't have a voice on this issue except what voice we take for ourselves online. For the first 15 years that I ran the AVN, it was not a battle. There were people who disagreed with me, and that was okay. Nobody tried to keep their children away from my children. They thought, if my kids are vaccinated and yours are not, what am I worried about? My kids will be protected. In 2009 is when things started to change. An organization was started in Australia called Stop the AVN. And they're part of a group called the Australian Skeptics. And these are pretty hateful people who their whole reason for being was to stop our organization from existing and to do anything in their power to do that. The person who started it, Daniel Raphael, he actually said that I'm going to make sure that the AVN is no more, and if that means that their president, Meryl Dorey, is also no more, so be it. The government bodies were colluding with the Stop the AVN. They were leaking our private information. They were taking out complaints against us. We had to go to the Supreme Court in New South Wales, and we won against the Supreme Court. And what the government did after that victory was they simply changed the legislation so that they could personally attack the AVN.
A Melbourne GP who claims to have helped hundreds of parents dodge vaccinations for their children has spoken out, arguing he's done nothing illegal. But doctors have slammed John Peace, saying he's spreading dangerous misinformation. Dougal Beattie with the story.
A qualified general practitioner turned advocate for the rogue anti-vaccination movement.
I am quite convinced that there are many, many children being damaged in our society by unsafe vaccines.
Dr. John Peace, along with naturopath colleague Nerida James, were filmed earlier this month claiming to help Melbourne parents avoid immunisations for their children.
We can support you, and we have been supporting about 600 families thanks to Dr. John Peace.
But the doctor who's being investigated says he's done nothing wrong.
So it's totally legal, but they don't like it because they don't want anyone to be allowed not to vaccinate without penalty.
His group accused of spreading dangerous propaganda.
If you have a child that's been, been brain damaged by vaccines, do you want to vaccinate that child further? Of course not.
What happened was that there was the first tour of the Vaxxed movie, came to Melbourne August the 6th, 2017, and I went along to it, and there was a discussion period afterwards, and I made the mistake of just getting up and reassuring the parents that there was a legal way for children to be exempt from the no jab, no play law, which prevented unvaccinated children from going into preschool or kindergartens, that there was a legal way to do it, and there were doctors who were willing to do it. That's all I said, actually. But there was a stooge in the audience who was, he was like a spy, and he reported that I had said that, had boasted that we'd saved over 300 children from, or some crazy figure like that, from vaccination, which is totally untrue. I didn't say it. In fact, I don't know where that figure came from, because my figures would not have been that, you see. And so that was attributed to me. And then he released that to the media, who dutifully reported what he said, untruthfully. And so out came the headings, rogue anti-vax doctor, you see. And that just was enough to inflame the politicians. And so whoever they were, Hunt or Hennessy, or the Commonwealth and state level, very quickly got to the medical board and basically gave them orders to get this guy. So very quickly the medical board, they must have had it pretty much ready to go, I think. They issued a suspension of registration, which was confirmed in the Immediate Action Committee. And their pretext was that I was a serious risk to public health. And their reasons for thinking that, as they gave them, were that unvaccinated children were seriously at risk. And you'd think they had some evidence for that, but they don't need evidence. They also alleged that I was promoting non-vaccination, which I wasn't. All I was doing, I had people coming to me, parents who had decided not to vaccinate. There was no way that I was going to talk them out of that. They were already quite convinced that they were not going to vaccinate. And I wasn't talking to parents who had decided to vaccinate and had come to me to be persuaded not to. That's totally false. Because I was only dealing with the parents who didn't want to vaccinate. And then the other claim was that I had been spreading misinformation. Now, they didn't specify what the misinformation was. There's no way I could, possibly respond to that. I was not giving anything that was untruthful to those parents who came. What I gave to them was always, I gave them advice about how to bolster the immune system of their children with supplements and good diet and those basic things. Occasionally I would give them the link to the United States vaccine injury compensation statistics if they wanted them. But I was not proselytising against vaccination. But with all these false claims, they made out that I was a serious risk to public health and had to be taken out of practice. And that's the way they affected it. And then there was going to be a big, long process. And as time went on, I just became more and more worn out by stress. And about nearly a year later, I decided, no, there's no point. I could see myself deteriorating because I've got prostate cancer. That cancer was caused by stress. Cancer is activated by stress. And I could see my circulating tumour cell counts went from 0 to positive again. And I was feeling very ill, so I decided to pull the plug. But that wasn't enough. 3 weeks later, the medical board, through APRA, announced that it was going to take me to the VCAT to find me guilty of professional misconduct. So they wouldn't let up, you see. They had to do a Wakefield on me. They had to, show that I was a scoundrel and get it all into the media and everything, you see. And so that's how it happened with me.
So they pushed you out?
Yes, they pushed me out. And of course, they've done it to many, many doctors down the years as well. So not only is there censorship, but the ears are deaf. They do not want to hear.
Yeah. Did they label you as anything, the media?
Not really, no. But I would laugh, It's
like anti-vax?
Oh, actually, no. I am not anti-vaccination. I am very much for forceful mandatory vaccination with the flu vaccine of all politicians and all those who push vaccines. Absolutely, they should get it preferentially.
Tell us a little bit what happened with 60 Minutes.
Well, it is on record, people can watch it. Basically, it was one of their failed interviews, because when they became aggressive towards me, I stopped the interview and I say, I'm withdrawing my permission to enter my house, please get out. And that was it. The interview is finished.
Why were they?
The usual sort of, the interviewer was quite aggressive. Started telling me as if she knew everything, but she actually didn't. I actually told her, you are no expert at all, you don't know anything.
Yeah.
Yes, you can't even ask the right questions.
Yeah, I remember seeing it now that she was trying to say you're not a doctor and
Well, who said that I was? But I mean, it is actually more important that I am a scientist because I am not part of the system. And I can say whatever I like.
Do not consent to giving my name. Okay. There is no name to give. Exactly. Am I under arrest? Am I being detained here? No, I'm just trying to speak to you.
Why is she under arrest?
Come on.
Why is she under arrest? Why is she under arrest? Leave her alone. Leave her alone. What are your privilege? You're not me. Oh my God.
That woman was Renee Outer-Kitchery and her 4-year-old son.
So, Isaac and I turn up there Saturday, May 9, about 2:40. We're walking up and down peacefully, exercising our rights, not protesting. We were approached at about 3:20, 3:25 by a female officer. She said, I'm of the belief that you're breaking some COVID restriction guideline. And look, it just went to a point where I said, am I under arrest? She answered no. Am I being detained? She answered no. I said, well, I'm free to go. She didn't have anything to say that. I said, I'm going to continue walking now. And within 20 minutes later, so it happened about 3:50, 3:40, something 3:50. My son and I were walking to go across the road back to our car through Martin Place, and we were literally reefed back by my arm. I was holding my son's hand, and it was like, you're not going anywhere. You're under arrest. Like, what for? I haven't committed any offence. I have not committed any criminal offence. I'm not hurting anyone. I'm not breaking your pathetic little COVID rules and restrictions, which we didn't. We were socially distancing from anyone else walking in the street. The only time we did stop was when we were talking to police along the way. And it was all a very friendly environment. There was other people down there with their children and families. There was probably no more than about maybe 30 people. And for some reason we were targeted, and you sort of look back and think, as I was saying to you before, you wake up one morning with the intention of expressing and exercising your rights, and at no stage do you think you're ever going to have that happen to you. You don't think you're going to suffer such a brutal arrest by the hands of police who are supposed to be looking after us.
Absolutely. Well, I, for the first time ever in 10 years of calling myself a vegan psychologist, I've now been called a conspiracy theorist. And when I actually challenge people on that, I say to them, when people use that, it's a way to make people smile and shut things down. And yet, you would know that the term conspiracy theory came out by the CIA. It was created to challenge anyone or discredit anyone who challenged the narrative about the death of JFK. So I say to someone, it's actually a compliment to be called a conspiracy theorist, but what it's done through media, through films, it's actually made people think of little green men, so people smile, and I immediately don't have the open-mindedness to do that. Now, instead of people thinking that's just happened, I think it's a deliberate ploy fed into our culture to stop people questioning. And it disempowers people, because people really then stop asking questions. Then we give our power over to others who are playing a pretty long game here to get an outcome.
Hello guys, how you going? So this is one of many pit stops along this journey to speak to all these individuals in the film and hear their story. But along the way, we have to take breaks and have a bit of balance as well. So we'll give you a little taste. Here's a little bit of what we
the kitchen.
Yep.
There's gonna be a sink here.
Yeah, it's not fully finished yet.
Pantry.
Yep.
Bins. Fridge.
Is that working yet?
No,
Not yet, no.
we don't have solar yet.
Yeah, right.
So we got to do that.
That's why we're like, we need an electrician. Yeah, right, okay.
Hey. 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 I think that with the term conspiracy theorist, it's kind of weaponized in a way, so people completely shut off and become desensitized in the way that they don't actually hear anything other than the official narrative. And it just takes away from the fact that the government is there to serve the people, not the other way around. And if we continue to live in a democracy where we're only given the truth from one source, from the government, from the mainstream media, and anything else is deemed conspiracy, then we'll never really have any access to anything but the prescribed. And just for me alone, in this last 8 months, I have seen, in a way, censorship happening that I've never seen before because I wasn't paying attention. I didn't have the information to begin with, so I couldn't see it being deleted. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. It's very hard to fathom if you haven't seen it being deleted as it comes, because it just didn't ever exist. And so once you kind of let go of what you think you know because of what we've been given through the mainstream media, through our governments, and be open to the fact that, of course, there is more.
I'm pro-vaccination, but this just doesn't sit. There's something about this that just doesn't sit right with me. I just get the feeling that this might further harden the attitudes and the beliefs of the anti-vaxxers, and I feel like there's a lot of anger and force around this. And Sarah even said in the first response that there's selfishness, which I agree, but there's fear.
The other thing is, I don't understand this debate becomes so emotive about, people's rights or freedom of choice.
There's basically no reason not to vaccinate your kids.
No reason.
It's the smart thing and it's the right thing to do to immunise your children. If they choose to not do that, well, the taxpayers aren't going to subsidise that choice for them.
This is like any vaccine. And as you know, I have a pretty strong view on vaccines, being the social services minister that introduced no jab, no play. So we will be seeking its most widespread application, as we do with all important vaccines. But Paul, you may want to talk about how those practices are followed, and we'll be doing that, of course, in partnership with states and territories.
Thank you, PM. So, of course, the first will be a voluntary call for people, and I'm sure there will be long queues, socially distanced, of course, for this vaccine. It will be incredibly welcomed by many. It will be the absolute ticket to get back to some sort of normal society and the things that we all love and enjoy. So I think there will be a very strong take-up of this vaccine. Of course, there will be some that, for medical reasons, as the PM has said, may not be able to take the vaccine. But there'll be very strong campaigns to encourage people, and we've had experience before of linking vaccination with other programs.
The vaccine for COVID-19 here in Australia, manufactured here in Australia, distributed free to 25 million Australians in the event that those trials prove successful. Professor Brendan Murphy is heading up an expert panel which is advising the government on the other programs and the other projects that we can take positions on to ensure that Australia is incredibly well placed to ensure that Australians can emerge quickly in the event that a vaccine is developed.
We will have a very successful vaccine, therapeutic, and cure. We're making tremendous progress. I deal with these incredible scientists, doctors, very, very closely. I have great respect for their minds, and they have come up with things, and they've come up with many other cures and therapeutics over the years. These are the people, the best, the smartest, the most brilliant anywhere. And they've come up with the AIDS vaccine, Ebola vaccine, and others. These are the people that have done it. or these are the people that have been around it, and they're all competing. It's an incredible thing. All of these brilliant firms, labs, companies are competing, and I will tell you, we're very far advanced. We've already started tests and trials.
It's getting to crisis point, isn't it? The anti-vaxxer message.
Yeah, which is a bit silly. You know, the anti-vaxxers
who are anti-vaxxers with
anti-vaccine propaganda has
the crazy anti-vaxxer nut jobs.
Anti-vax parents will anti-vaccination movement.
No jab, no play policy.
The no jab, no play policy is enforced.
We can only hope that this policy will force some people that have refused to do the right thing to have a rethink. So I think that it would be great that if you don't immunise your child, then you can't enrol in a school.
We have to make sure that everyone is vaccinated for the safety of our community.
As we've seen in this case, people such as newborn babies who can't get vaccinated, who are incredibly vulnerable. The science is in. There is no debate about it whatsoever. That idiotic debate about the MMR vaccine that has been completely discredited. The Lancet, which published it, has completely withdrawn it. Which Stefan was
completely,
it's absolutely wrong. The doctor has been completely disbarred. It is absolutely beyond any shadow of a doubt the best thing you can do to save your child and save the children around them from diseases we have wiped out decades ago.
I'd always been a strong supporter of the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. And then I just started to hear parents say to me, look, after this vaccine, my child changed, you know? And I just said, look, it's just coincidence, just coincidence. And then I started to think, well, where's the evidence? So I read the myths of the anti-vaccination movement put out by the federal government. And I came across an article by Honda and Sir Michael Rutter. And basically, as the heading said, there's no effect of MMR withdrawal on the incidence of autism, a total population study. Really good study, good science, good data. However, you can read it another way. Hideo Honda's a decent man, had a bit of dialogue with him, and he said, well, no vaccinologist was involved in the study. But you can clearly see on this graph that there's challenge, de-challenge when people stop taking the vaccination, and when they introduce the monovials, with separate measles, separate mumps and separate rubella, it really spiked up. So this is graphical evidence that the MMR vaccine is indeed associated with autism. Children who get rubella, and I've seen cases of rubella, it's a terrible disease. It smashes kids if the mother has that infection in her first trimester, which I've seen. The child gets hearing disorders, can be deaf, small brain, cardiac abnormalities, and by virtue of the cognitive disorder, sometimes autism secondary to the rubella. So the multiple causes of autism in children, and I think we're having an epidemic at the moment which has not been acknowledged. Some of that's due to the vaccine, but also we know lead's implicated, cadmium, arsenic, aluminium and mercury, both found in vaccines. So I thought, this is not right, you know. We really need to have the wiggle room to decide who is it safe to vaccinate, who is it not safe to vaccinate. Certainly in my reading of the earlier research around the whooping cough vaccine, children 6.5 times more likely to die in the 3 days following the whooping cough vaccine than from day 30 onwards. And the researchers found that finding worrisome. Well, I'd be alarmed, and I've seen, you know, in Africa, I vividly recall a mother bringing her child around from the vaccine clinic. Child was dead within the hour of having a vaccine. So when you start to read the data, when you start to look at it, and you start to look at the narrative, we had a surge in SIDS in the late 70s, early 80s. It went up and it came down. And that was attributed to the posture of the child. The children who slept on their tummies, who were in the prone position, they died from SIDS. And then that study, I think, was originally done here in Australia or Australasia, and then it was repeated elsewhere, I think in the Netherlands. And so the narrative goes that this is all the matter of the mothers sleeping the child in the poor posture, or that mothers were couch surfing, and they're increasingly doing that now, or the mother was a smoker, or she had unhealthy social habits and smothered her child inadvertently, or indeed she might have killed her child. But and yet, if we look at it, it's the vaccine. So I'd say the whooping cough vaccine has been responsible for as many, if not more, deaths than a smoking household.
What made you question that?
I've previously been very pro-vaccination. And early in my career, I would wag my finger at parents and saying, if you don't vaccinate your child, you're a negligent parent. Such was my belief that in 2009, I gave myself a swine flu vaccine to convince my patient at the time, the first patient who was going to have the swine flu vaccine, that it was safe. Because at the time, Kevin Rudd had indemnified the vaccine companies against litigation. And a few of my patients, one of whom was a retired and retired physicist, had concerns. I said, no, it's safe, I'll take the first one myself, which I did. A little while later, I found myself in the stroke unit. Then I had to reflect upon what's going on here. So when I reflect back to when I was 33, and I was a registrar in neonatal intensive care and child intensive care in Perth, I had several shots of hepatitis B. As you do, you don't want to get Hep B, it's a dangerous condition. The first shot failed, so they offered me a double dose. And sometime later, it might have been weeks or months later, I collapsed with a pericardial tamponade and was initially diagnosed with TB pericarditis and put on anti-tuberculous medication. I was off full-time work for a year or more, and after 5 months being on the TB medication, my cardiologist, Professor John Hickey at St Vincent's Hospital, said, look, it's not TB, it's just autoimmune pericarditis. My question would be, well, look, is this real or is this just the narrative? And certainly I think David Sackett, a founding father of evidence-based medicine and a former retired senior epidemiologist from Oxford, said basically that, look, the vaccine companies create their own narrative. They don't accept responsibility and they have a terrible consequence for many lives. Now, I certainly was naive to a lot of this other narrative, the counter-narrative about how dangerous vaccines were, until I started to dig into it. So as the acting director of public health, and I was in charge of vaccinations in Western New South Wales in 1994, as I said, I used to wag my finger judgmentally at mothers who weren't vaccinating. And anyone who came out against vaccination, I would rip into them. But I was ignorant of the other side. And certainly we're not taught. We're only taught about the benefits of vaccination. We're not talking about the downside. And I know currently, I know of recent nursing graduates in Sydney, and they are not taught anything about the downside of vaccines. They're told about all the benefits, but they said, oh, you can read about all that propaganda from the anti-vaxxers online. It's not propaganda, it's people who've suffered, either had a death or a serious disability. Not talking about a bit of a sore shoulder, but a serious disability following a vaccine. More recently, there was a study which came out in the British Medical Journal, I think it was December last year, talking about pathways to independence by Ray Monahan from Bond University, great researcher, and others. And we're realising that 40 years, we've had lies and deceit, and we've had endemic enmeshment between the pharmaceutical industry and the medical profession, which has impacted biomedical research across the board. It's affected medical education across the board. It's affected public health policy and policies around health across the board, with adverse outcomes for our populations. Medicine is a self-serving institution, and I think our divorce from the natural health therapies has had a profound implication for our health. And certainly I think that the tort reform in the United States in 1975, which basically absolved vaccine producers in the United States from litigation, has had a profound impact on the research around the harms that vaccines can cause. And in this country, if your child, or indeed if yourself, your own bodily self has been harmed by vaccines, it's very hard to get litigation. But people aren't aware that this is really associated with a flu vaccine, so they're not litigating. The lawyers aren't coming to the party, perhaps because they feel intimidated as well. It's hard to sue. My dad was a judge in workers' compensation in the Workers' Compensation Commission of New South Wales, and he used to say the doctors will get away with murder. And I would say that the public health physicians get away with mass murder. I know that sounds harsh, but we need to say, well, where's the transparency? If you're going to say it's safer, provide the data. The problem with the peer-reviewed process is that often the peer reviewers are on the same page as you and part of your club. And so there's a lot of unconscious bias there, and there's a lack of critical thinking around the science. So we need to restore science to its rightful position, to investigate the truth rather than just to validate the policy. Yeah. And I think certainly this article by Hondren Rutter was to validate policy, not to investigate the truth. And unless we investigate the truth with good science, we'll be blindsided by the brainwashing, can I put it that way, that goes on within the biomedical research industry, which, as I said, is affecting research, education and policy with very poor outcomes for our country. And across the whole developed world, in fact, across the whole globe, human beings are suffering because of bad science.
The one question I ask medical professionals, because I want to know the understanding, is I'm not for or against vaccines, but I do believe we're allowed to ask the question, should always be able to ask the question, why is it that the vast majority of the population don't seem to have any adverse effects from them? So that would seem that they're okay and necessary for certain things that are out there. But why is there a small percentage of the population that seems to be having adverse effects to it?
People call me an anti-vaxxer. Well, I'm not. You know, like if you say you want to get a vaccine, I'm not going to tell you not to. If you ask me a question, if you say, hey, do you know what's in vaccines? Do you know if it's a good idea? I'll give you my answer. But if you don't ask me, I'm not going to tell you.
Mandatory anything medical is an absolute no-no. How can anybody be pro that? That's insane, number one. So as a registered nurse, I am not allowed to have a perspective about vaccines that isn't in alignment with what I'm told it needs to be. And I did my nursing CPD update a few months back, and I read in my nursing sort of charter or whatever it was, I need to promote vaccines. So I have to say what I have to say.
I'm not anti-vax in as much as that I'm happy to believe anything as long as I can be shown the facts. And here we're relying on pharmaceutical and organisations like the TGA and the CDC in America to give us information, but these are platooned with pharmaceutical people. This is a huge growth industry, and one of the reasons it's so growth is because there's no threat of liability. They can produce a drug for diabetes, and if that's got problems, they can be sued. They can do something for cancer, they can be sued. But on a vaccine, it's a free ticket.
So on this continent, we're still in this position where a lot of people believe in the original narrative. It's like everything else we get jammed down our throat. We get jammed down our throat that it's okay to get a 2-week-old baby and throw 50 poisons into its body along with a bunch of viruses that could possibly kill it, but this is good for the baby, you know? I don't think anybody's got the right to force anybody else to have their body subjected to any invasive practice. I think that before a politician can force me to be vaccinated, he should be forced, or she should be forced, to give me the needle and allow me to stick it wherever I want in their body and inject whatever is in it, the first half of whatever it is in it, into their body. Whether that's their eye or their ear or their throat, it's all good. They want to stick this in my body, let me stick it in yours and I'll whack you with a bit of this shit, then I'll have the balance.
In particular, at the moment, at the present situation, there's great concern about mandatory vaccinations. And even though they say that they're not mandatory at the moment, if you do not have your children vaccinated, you cannot go to preschool. So we've got all these lovely choices, and yet we're being railroaded and suppressed and coerced and bullied into actually choosing only one way. And this is causing great distress, and people one by one are finding out, unfortunately, through injury. And you know, often these people are called anti-vaxxers, which is very offensive and abusive. If they introduce mandatory vaccinations, and at the moment they say they're not mandatory. However, like I said before, you still have a choice, but look what happened to the preschoolers. And here, we already hear people saying, well, if you want to do preschool teaching, but you don't want a flu shot, then find another job. Now this is coercion. It's mandatory. People are beginning to think and wake up, and I trust Australians will wake up. I think that they will have this insight. We're having people starting to speak out about it, and especially when it starts to affect them or they have an injury and then they realise. So until you do, please have an open mind. Anybody that's listening to this, it's like peanut butter. If you can eat peanut butter, don't assume everybody can, because some have anaphylactic shocks to it. And it's the same with vaccines. Just because you might have had a vaccine at the moment and you don't appear to have had a reaction, that doesn't mean other people don't.
We were put down as anti-vaxxers for the rally. I can openly say I am not an anti-vaxxer. I am for pro-choice. Richie, it's your right to decide for yourself whether you want that injection or not. You're not in prison, right? You're not forced to do anything. You should be always, as a human being, it's your God-given right to be asked, what would you like? Would you like this? No, I wouldn't, thank you.
Making any medical procedure mandatory is immoral and unethical. All medical procedures carry with them the risks of lifelong disability and death. Any drug, any vaccine can kill someone or can injure them permanently. We are signatories to the Nuremberg Code. The NHMRC, which is an Australian body, specifically said that all medical procedures must be without coercion, without any form of penalty, and must be done with information, giving the person fully informed choice. Any form of mandatory vaccination or medication is completely against any moral code that you could possibly imagine. For the people who are at the very top, I think money, power, and control are what are concerned there. For the people at the coalface, the average GP, the health minister, that sort of thing, I think what motivates them more than anything else is fear. They're taught that people who are not vaccinated or not vaccinating are a threat to the rest of society, and they don't question why that is. They just are taught that. So they look at us and they say, we need to stop this. This is a threat. In the government, there is a strong fear that if they allow people to know that vaccines can cause harm and death, that they will be held accountable. There is not enough money in the richest country in the world to pay the lawsuits that will take place once parents with children who've been killed or injured by vaccines take legal action. The governments have been backed into a corner because they've been defending vaccines for decades, and not only defending them, but trying to force people to take them without a matter of choice. So they're in a place where they can't allow this sort of information to come out because they may be liable when that happens.
And then we found out up in North Queensland, some of the young kids there were vaccinated 9 or 10 times more.
I was able to do an analysis of the health situation of these children, comparing that of the vaccinated to the unvaccinated. It was quite clear that the unvaccinated children were very much healthier by far than the vaccinated ones. I think there was about 30% of the unvaccinated children who had health issues, which were mainly just allergies. But they were well because their parents had, identified the allergies and kept them off their reactive foods, etc. Whereas by contrast, the vaccinated children, about 80% of them had health issues. Looking at the autism question, there were no autistic children in the unvaccinated, but there were about 9% of the vaccinated children in this particular group were autistic. And autism spectrum overall 13% compared with, I think, about less than 1% in the unvaccinated group. I became, more and more convinced, seeing all this harm that was being done to some children, the whole question of vaccinations needed to be rethought. Of course, that put me at odds with mainstream, because most doctors are told and believe in faith that vaccines are very, very safe, and they believe that they're very, very effective. When you get into the science of it, the science behind vaccinations is appalling. Dr. Andrew Wakefield and his colleagues did a small study looking at just 12 cases, and they concluded from their analysis that it was likely that in 8 out of those 12 vaccines had caused the autism that they were reviewing. And of course he became a pariah. He was deregistered and thrown out of medicine and accused of scientific fraud and all sorts of terrible things. And the last word in this paper was, more research is needed. Well, the vaccine industry did respond with more research designed to prove that vaccines did not cause autism, or at least the MMR. And so they paid for and constructed a series of studies, mostly in Denmark, where they had good compliant affiliates. And these studies were dressed up to convince people that the vaccines didn't cause autism. They're shonky in one fundamental reason, because they didn't have a control group which was unvaccinated. They talked about having an unvaccinated group in the abstracts, but when you delve deeper, you find the unvaccinated groups were actually vaccinated children who had not yet had the MMR. So they were comparing one vaccinated group to another. But of course, most people don't read beyond the abstract, and they believe what they're told to believe. They only looked at the MMR. They didn't look at any of the other vaccines. And it's since been shown that that's the case, that there's been no research relating autism to any of these other vaccines. And yet they're saying that because they managed to convince the world that the MMR vaccine didn't cause autism, that exonerated all the other vaccines which hadn't been looked at. I mean, you have to have a very uncritical mind to believe the assertions that the vaccine industry and its lackeys put over. There are no robust, scientifically valid safety studies done pre-registration. And then post-registration, the follow-up about side effects and outcomes is just not done. There are committees which advise our government on vaccine safety. One of our activists tried to get a list of the conflicts of interest of the members of that committee, and was told it wasn't going to be freely available. Even if she did a FOI, they wouldn't let her have it because it's under privacy restrictions. So that they know that there are conflicts of interest in the people who are advising government about vaccine safety. The Australian Immunisation Handbook has been like the guidelines statement for doctors and for the profession about recommendations for the use of vaccine and vaccine safety. Guideline statements are required by the NHMRC to list the conflicts of interest of all the contributory authors. That has never been done for the handbook. They're also supposed to be subjected to quite rigorous analysis of the quality of the evidence, the grades of the evidence. This is all guideline statements under the NHMRC's requirements. Guess what? The handbook has never been subjected to analysis of the quality of the evidence. For instance, the section of that handbook which deals with medical exemptions, with exemptions from vaccination, they don't list the authors, let alone the conflicts of interest, and they only grant exemption to cases where there's been anaphylaxis or where there is immunocompromise. And they have a list of what they call false contraindications, and there is no evidence listed as to why these listed items could be regarded as false contraindications. No evidence, just a list stating it. No reason, no evidence, no science. And what about children who've already been vaccine damaged, who are required to undergo further vaccination? No. That's not even listed. So a child that's already been vaccine damaged has to keep on being vaccinated. One would think that being damaged by a vaccine was an indication of susceptibility. A reasonable person would say, yeah, well, that's not unreasonable. However, that's not even listed. Yeah. Put this all together and you have an appalling history of unsafe vaccines, a system which supports the vaccine industry producing their unavoidably unsafe vaccines, and not really caring about the damage it's causing to the recipient children.
The first unit of our monitor, which we called cot watch, like watching the baby's bed cot, went to the first couple who decided to monitor their newborn baby's breathing. 1980s was the time when people thought that babies were dying. They didn't link it to any special event, just babies died for no apparent reason. So monitoring at home was the thing to do. There were other monitors, but they actually were different from cot watch because they were only motion monitors, meaning any movement was perceived as breathing. While cot watch had the electronics that separated the signal from the heart and from the lungs, and only breathing delayed the alarms. That's the difference between life and death. People started experiencing alarms 2 months into monitoring. And our first question was, what happened? You see, Cotes researchers at the time, they didn't ask what happened to those babies. They thought that suddenly tens of thousands of babies in developed countries are born with inborn fault in breathing controls. But we asked what happened. And in all cases, the child was vaccinated. When we saw pediatricians, and told them that babies had alarms after vaccination. We thought they would be pleased. Suddenly we have an answer here. But they were not pleased at all. Some of them looked at us with hatred. And we were perplexed. We looked at each other with like, what was he on about? Why was he so hostile? When we actually told him, lead out of a mystery of Cotes. And then, of course, we also looked at each other and said, it's the vaccines that are killing babies. And that totally changed everything in our lives. I also started going to medical libraries because I asked myself, do they know about this? Is there anything published about this? And of course, to my surprise, I found tens of thousands of articles in medical libraries
that address the death after vaccination. So they know about it, they just don't want the parents to know. I actually encourage doctors or anybody who is interested to study what is already there. And the result, of course, is this library, which is a national treasure. Nobody has collected so many papers on one subject privately, okay, as I have. There is just no end to it.
Yeah.
They publish one after another. Even those who are pro-vaccination still will admit that vaccines are connected to death. Another thing is they do testing on animals. And when an animal dies after vaccination, they know it was caused by the vaccine. But when baby dies, they start sort of wriggling out of it.
That's one of the main arguments that people have that, just believe that vaccines are good. They talk about how it eradicated polio and smallpox and measles.
That's totally untrue. It's not documented by published facts. It is as simple as that. Published facts are showing different things. That it was always introducing the disease by puncturing the skin into the system, and that provoked paralysis. So there is no such thing as infantile paralysis as a separate disease. We have the skin to protect us against entry of bacteria and viruses, and they puncture the skin and introduce bacteria and viruses and a lot of toxic substances like formaldehyde and all sorts of other things into the system. That cannot possibly prevent any disease. It causes a disease. It has the disease, and it is actually forcefully pushed into the system, even the disease in much worse form than natural disease.
Because the body is rejecting it already from being forced.
Because it is very toxic. Yeah.
Would you say has the most controversy around it and it actually causing what is being said it's called,
All vaccines. All vaccines. Whether it is individual vaccines or triple vaccines like MMR, they do cause autism, of course, and a New York judge actually ruled that vaccines are inherently dangerous, and many courts, particularly in Italy, admit that vaccines cause autism. It's obvious, right? You have a healthy child today, it is vaccinated, and within 24 hours loses it, right? Stops talking when he already was talking, and loses ability to normally contact. It will not look into your eyes, etc. Obviously autistic. So the word obvious is very important. Doctors, they are part of the system. So in a way, I understand it. If I employed someone to do work for me and they would start working against me, then I don't think I would like it. It is actually more important that I am a scientist because I am not part of the system, and I can say whatever I like. When I was seeing medical doctors, which I made it my prerogative to see medical doctors, even health officials, they introduced me, she is the real doctor. She had to work for it. It is also a very nice, polite way saying she's not a medical doctor.
In a nutshell I think we've come to think that our only solution to our health problems is a vaccine. Once we get that, we'll be able to make ourselves more robust. We'll be able to fight off anything that comes along. Scant attention being paid for the fact that we are most amazing machines that actually are able to develop immune systems and fight off illnesses. But we're at a time in our history when people are looking for a vaccine. We have to ward this off. We've got this very clinical, masculine approach to dealing with disease. It's in the language, fighting cancer, warding off diseases, as opposed to working with our body in a more holistic sort of way to look after that. You know, I remember once making a post about a piece of literature that had come out, and a 6-month-old baby had died after receiving a cocktail of vaccines. I didn't make an opinion on it. I said, what an impossible situation for a parent. Knowing that information, what would you do? Because you go to the professional who says, look, you're being negligent if you don't, based on their expertise and experience, and yet this child's died. And I was immediately criticized as the fact of even questioning the narrative was dangerous. That immediately makes me question a lot of things. Open our minds. Don't accept things wholesale. You know, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of movement is absolutely essential. And often it's the fear of what will happen. I'll get struck off. I'll get criticized. My reputation, I'll lose followers. I encourage people to dare to do that, because when you do what is right from your heart and from your sense of knowing and integrity, ultimately it's right for other people. Do you want to go to your deathbed wishing, well, you know, I knew the truth, but I was worried about my reputation or my income? Or are you someone who's prepared to stand up and be counted and actually say, no, when this problem was out, where was I?
I just want to be clear in terms of the definition of people dying of COVID. So the case definition is very simplistic. It means at the time of death, it was a COVID positive diagnosis. So that means that if you were in hospice and had already been given, you know, a few weeks to live, and then you also were found to have COVID, that would be counted as a COVID death. It means that if technically, even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. So everyone who's listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that that was the cause of the death, but they had COVID at the time of death.
We have a number of reports from countries who are doing very detailed contact tracing. They're following asymptomatic cases, they're following contacts, and they're not finding secondary transmission onward. It's very rare. It still appears to be rare that an asymptomatic individual actually transmits onward.
So this is about how Public Health England calculates who has died from coronavirus and who gets added, whose deaths get added on to that tally that we've grown used to seeing day by day, that currently stands at around 45,000. Now the issue is that the way it's being counted at the moment means that if you are diagnosed, you test positive for coronavirus, even if you go into hospital, but then you recover and you come out, and then 2 months later, say, or a period of time later, you then die of something completely unrelated to coronavirus, your death will still be added to that coronavirus death tallies.
Authorities want to see fewer large gatherings and less mixing in the community. We're also being asked to reconsider our behaviour while out and about, as using a loud voice or bursting into song can cause the virus to spread.
Now, 13 top doctors from across Melbourne have united to slam Daniel Andrews' response to the COVID-19 pandemic, describing it as ill-focused, heavy-handed and unjustifiable. The group, made up of urologists, psychiatrists and surgeons, has sent a letter to the Premier's office urging him to end the harsh Stage 4 restrictions. They're also against extending the state of emergency and want greater input on the government's decision-making.
So before this COVID-19 pandemic, I wasn't much of an activist. I did research any and everything, but I didn't share much, and I was worried about my reputation. But this COVID-19 really brought the censorship to the surface for me. Everything I was seeing going on in the States, I was starting to see here in Australia, and I needed to shed light on that. So this documentary is a product of all the research we've done, all the interviews we've done, over 20 hours put into 2 hours. So here's our gift to you. So what's your thoughts, perspective surrounding COVID-19 in a nutshell?
Sure. My thoughts on COVID-19, I have no idea. I actually have no idea. There are that many theories out there, from mainstream through to alternative and beyond, and I believe it's an opportunity for growth. What I find fascinating is that we're spending so many billions and billions and billions of dollars on trying to find a solution, a man-made solution to maybe a man-made problem. I don't know. When we haven't come together as humanity to fix some of the most basic human issues and planetary issues so far.
Yeah, I'm not even sure there's actually a virus. I think it's just a big control measure. People are super afraid of something that they can't see. And as soon as their personal safety is threatened, then they're right into that lower sense of the ego where now everybody else needs to take responsibility for them. So therefore everybody has to do what they're doing. So when they want to put measures like these lockdowns and things in, they have to do a bit of work, but they know that if they strike the fear into the general population and the general population doesn't think for itself, then they're going to self-regulate. So you and I might walk down the street, But if our neighbours are all part of that majority of the population, they're going to dob us in, or they're going to try to stop us themselves. The powers that be don't necessarily have to do it all themselves. So I think that this whole COVID thing is just one big setup to try to arrest more control from us, take more of our rights back, and to see, it's like a test. It's how will the population act and react? Like, will they just fall over like dominoes and let us do what we want? What percentage of people are going to stand up to this, so that when they want to roll out the real one, I actually think this is a warm-up, to be honest. I think we're yet to see what they're capable of doing, either depopulating or taking in massive control measures, forcing people to do things that they don't want to do.
You know, if you can look at, nothing of major importance happens on the world that isn't planned to happen that way. And if you see what the plan is, which is to lead us into this complete technocracy, then you start to notice all the steps that they take all through the years to bring us to that point, the point that we are right now, where we're being moved into this technocracy under the pretext of protecting us from a pandemic, which is killing nobody. When you look at Australia, the figures are incredible. We got over 25 million people in Australia, or 7,000 people infected, apparently, 98 deaths. And they've shut the whole country down for it. And they're bringing all this mass surveillance and keeping people 1.5 metres apart, which is for surveillance and to keep tabs on everybody. It's not to protect you from any virus. And the lockdown's going to stay in place anyway. They'll ease it a little bit, but then there'll be the second wave that they're predicting, which they will, they won't even need to even construct a second wave. I mean, maybe they will, maybe they won't, but you won't even need to have people getting sick, because there's nobody getting sick now. And they've already constructed the first wave without there even actually being one. And when you see how quickly they've rolled out all this stuff, it becomes really, really apparent that what it's about is about the vaccinations. You can't develop vaccinations this quick for any virus anyway, even if viruses are real, which is highly debatable, that anything they tell us is real. So many doctors are speaking out about it. They haven't even isolated COVID-19. The tests that they're giving you, I suggest that the reason the tests are mandatory is because they're collecting DNA. It's about DNA sampling, and the vaccination is about microchipping, but beyond microchipping, like using the hydrogel type of technology. So undetectable microchipping that literally fuses with your cells, so yeah.
But then if you look, going back to the COVID, if you look at our bio makeup and the way we should be exposing ourselves to germs and playing in the dirt and having this natural immunity, that's all being stripped.
The reality is if you turn off the TV and you turn off your phones, you wouldn't know COVID existed if it does. But it's one of those things that there's no fear unless you buy into it, and everyone is buying into it. Turn off the television. It's programming you.
Well, what it's based on is fear. I mean, fear sells a lot of newspapers. Fear is an emotion totally overused by politicians and media editors alike. They're so scared from the narrative that they've heard from the media and they've heard from the politicians who were saying we have to close down the world, this could kill us all, that they will take anything that is outside that makes them not get coronavirus. What's really concerning for me as a direction in the world is an increasingly totalitarian and communist political direction, which is the ramifications of coronavirus, that this is okay, that we deal with the virus in the way of throwing a police force out to enforce what is a health order.
Why is this happening? And why the discipline that we have to not go here and not go there? All those things reminded me of when we can go on to a mission, when we can come off the mission.
They turn around and say, you must comply with this while we can play everywhere outside the box. You've got to stay inside the box. I don't see Bill Gates being restricted in his travel. I don't see, Kerry Stokes being restricted in his travel. He was allowed to fly into Australia in a private jet, didn't even have to go through customs, immigration, didn't have to go through fucking quarantine, nothing. Why? Because he's got money.
The first thing to me that jumps out at me every single day with the coronavirus is the fear. And I can't help but wonder why people are not noticing the fear, because For example, as a parent, and I know many other parents, we teach our kids to overcome the things they're afraid of. We don't let our kids get into a state where they're fearful every day. Everybody knows that it's not healthy or conducive to living a daily life, to be in a state of fear. Yet people have descended into fear, and it's being perpetuated on a daily basis by the media and by politicians. We need to ask why. Fear, it's fear. We have to question fear. This is intuitive. You don't even need brains to think about that. This is fear. What the heck is going on? Why is there so much fear? And the other thing that really, really bugs me on a daily basis is the fact that there has been no one standing up in a position of authority saying, guys, what you can do to strengthen your immune system is blah, blah, blah. And we all know, don't be afraid, don't be stressed, sleep well, get exercise, get some sun on your skin, take some vitamin C. These are basic things and we all know them. But there has been no reference at all, nothing that would empower people to think they may just be able to help themselves.
I'm an early childhood educator, and I just wanted to share this little story that after the initial lockdown and a lot of kids weren't coming into childcare centres, and I didn't see a lot of kids for a while, and so after a month or two some kids started returning, and one of my 3-year-olds said to me, I asked him, do you know why we haven't seen each other for a while? He was like, yeah, there's a computer virus going around. And I was like, wow, you're actually right. Majority of the world has only been exposed to this virus via a screen, by a computer. I was like, you're right, it is a computer virus that's going around.
You told me the outbreak is in Peakhurst. I work in Peakhurst. Don't know anyone that had it. You told me it was in Lugano. I work in Lugano. No one had it. You told me it was in Bondi and Clovelly. I work in Clovelly and Randwick. Nobody had it. Where is it? It was like, where's Wally? But this time it's, where's COVID?
What has happened now is the biggest hoax and scandal that has ever hit the world. And for a tiny little virus that would never kill a single person if they were treated properly and they didn't have a million underlying conditions, most of which were caused by drugs or vaccines in the first place or poor diet. We are closing down the world. We are putting people into bankruptcy. We are making people even more fearful than they are. One thing that COVID has shown us is that it is so easy to control a certain segment of society.
I know more recently there's been debate around the whole coronavirus issue, and somebody came out and said, well, we need to look at the impact of what these shutdowns are going to have in our society and how that'll impact on depression, and you'll have suicides and families torn apart and small businesses fall apart. So we're seeing a convergence of issues here, which are not being discussed in the mainstream media much. People have been locked away, they're stressed, every channel you turn on it's COVID, COVID, COVID. So this is how the message is manipulated, and we're not getting a broader picture. So in many ways, COVID is just a common cold with a very vicious vascular sting in its tail. So if you're predisposed to vasculopathy or vascular disease or clotting, that's what's going to kill you. It's not the common cold side of it, because we see from our children, the children are immune to COVID. There's very few mortality, negligible mortality in children under the age of 10. And that is telling us we have inherent immunity. And yet there's all this, look, we're helpless, we need the vaccine. So people are adopting the fear position. Without the doctors we'll die, without the vaccine we'll die, we've got to isolate. And there's no broad public health messaging around nutrition, and they need to reform what we eat. The whole medical paradigm seems to have been narrowed down to very focused on the vaccine.
It's like at the moment our health retreat is closed down, and yet this is the very place that would be very good for people to come to get healthy bodies, to be able to resist the common cold and the flu, which really is all the coronavirus is. A young man he comes from time to time to be our cook. In fact, I think he's about 23 now. He's been coming since he was 16. He has a friend who just started his own business. The coronavirus hit, his restaurant was shut down. He was in incredible debt, so he took his own life. One of the girls that worked for us for a while, she used to work on cruise ships. And she said there's always deaths on cruise ships. She said sometimes they had so many deaths, that they had so many dead bodies, They had to put one dead body in the freezer for a few hours, bring it out, put another one in and alternate them. So when they talk about the deaths on the cruise ships, let's have a look at how many deaths there are usually on cruise ships.
Dr. Ian Brighthope back in the 70s was curing full-blown AIDS with intravenous ascorbate, which is the most remarkable treatment for viral illnesses. They're actually stopping the deaths in China with IV ascorbate. And he thought that that would be real interest to the doctors here who were involved in infectious diseases treatment and policy. So he arranged meetings with them to share with them what he was doing and his results. And but they didn't want to know about it. They weren't excited that there was a possible cure. And the medical board was totally intent on deregistering him, throwing him out of medicine. But we could avert this if we stopped this dip in the vitamin D levels with supplementation. That's the message he's trying to get out. Now, he's not getting any response. He's not even having his emails and letters answered. They're just totally ignoring him. This is the ministers, this is the medical officers of health and the media. They're all totally shut down against any information which may provide a better outcome for this epidemic.
Just as well I didn't study medicine because I wonder how much I would be brainwashed. Actually, when I communicated with a lot of those pediatricians and I told them about my history, they said, well, just as well you didn't study medicine because you would have been the same arrogant bastard as the rest of us. The World Health Organization obviously is there for the drug companies because they are financing, the major financer of World Health Organization. And drug companies need epidemics because then they produce vaccines and make billions on vaccines. This is not the first time because we had the Ebola virus, we had the Zika virus, SARS, etc. But as I said, I always go to the very first publication. So when they started talking about Zika virus as a world problem, I went to the very first paper. And actually, Zika virus is no virus at all. When there was an outbreak of microcephaly in Brazil, they didn't want to say that it was because they vaccinated pregnant mothers at the crucial time of pregnancy, right, around the third month, which calls microcephaly. Then they came up with this Zika virus. So there was no truth in it. And when they stopped vaccinating pregnant mothers, suddenly there was no more microcephaly. Then they had the Ebola virus, and I went again to the very first mention of the word Ebola. Ebola was simply a place in Africa where what was called a medical center, just a shed. There were 9 employees there, and they were giving antibiotics and other medications and things via injections. People like injections, oh, I was given an injection, right? But then they used non-sterile needles. So they used again and again and again the same dirty syringes on 100 people. Only God Almighty knows what was in those injections that they injected. But so there was no Ebola virus or anything like it. It was dirty injections.
The whole world has been brought down into lockdown. And when we actually start to look at the figures, it doesn't sort of stack up. The reaction is out of proportion to the threat. Now, a lot of people simplistically on social media would say it's because of the lockdowns it hasn't actually spread. However, when we start to look at the hordes of doctors who are being censored, who are challenging not only the amount of people that are being infected or dying from this, and the irregularity in the reporting of actual deaths, they're immediately being silenced. What is concerning to me is nothing's being told about our immune systems, how we can make them more robust. And the narrative keeps seeming to be played and our civil liberties are being reduced in proportion to those sort of lockdowns. That concerns me enormously. Something also does, if you actually go on to the congress.gov website in the US, in 2019, January, there was over $1 trillion put aside for a coronavirus pandemic relief fund. Our reaction to this is not purely health-based, and it's not about we're all going to die from a terrible virus. It has locked the world into an enormous amount of fear. and it's bringing economies to their knees as to why that is. There are certain writers that would suggest this was a new world order, this was the world wanting to be vaccinated. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that why that might be. And so again, I'm encouraging people to put aside looking at mainstream media. Go and look at things like London Real. Go and look at Dr. Buttar, Dr. Kaufman, Judy Mikovitz's book. Go on to these websites. I know it takes time, but we have a responsibility to ourselves and our families to not just be driven down a certain path, which I believe has a lot more to do than actually just protecting people's health.
I mean, are you open to letting us have a look at what you've shot?
Well, I just, like, you with ABC, right?
Yes. It's Four Corners, and
so,
we're doing a big, broad story on 5G. So looking at everything from the geopolitics of the rollout and the Huawei issue through to the science, the health concerns, the anti-5G movement has grown up so quickly globally online. So yeah, hopefully a pretty comprehensive story on the whole issue. And as part of that, obviously we want to use the visuals from a big march in central Sydney to talk about the rising awareness of it. Well, we've got good vision of everybody marching, and we'll make it clear that it was a whole bunch of people marching on a whole bunch of issues, but we want to zero in then on Naomi because that's the most relevant part to our story.
Yeah, a few media platforms, quickly labeled it, as anti-vax and anti-this and anti-that, when in reality the whole protest was about choice and freedom of choice and speech.
Yeah, that came across really well.
Yeah, I'm just a bit weary because obviously I don't know much about the Four Corners, but I just know that, media stations really twist things and they paint it as something that it's probably not.
Well, look, I can tell you, we will be talking about this march in context initially because, the size of it's impressive in the first place. But we will make it clear that there was a range of people, airing concerns over everything from, being forcibly locked down to, mandatory vaccinations to mandatory, living with 5G being rolled out without any discussion entered into. So yeah, that theme very much will come through.
In the centre of Sydney, anti-vaxxers, anti-lockdown activists, far-right conspiracy theorists and anti-5G campaigners have all united under the catchcry of freedom of choice.
COVID-19 has caused an explosion in public awareness. Rather than meekly hunkering down under house arrest, men and women have taken to their computers and began to ask questions, many of them for the first time.
Naomi Cook was invited to speak about 5G at the Sydney rally, which was organised by an anti-vaccination group. So was the joint rally a deliberate strategy to make it look like far more people were interested in each of the issues than was actually the case?
No, that's so sad. No, these were separate groups, each with very important issues that they were passionate about uniting on one day. Yeah, no, I don't think so. Certainly, in our groups, for example, we never said this was a 5G rally. No, I don't think so. You'd have to be pretty dishonest to do something like that.
That goes to my next question about 5G and what are your thoughts on that? And should we have a choice in that infrastructure going up and the ability to ask if it's safe?
100% I would say. The question I would ask is 5G or any new technology safe? Not only for human beings, but for other animals, the microbes in the soil, the environment. Is it safe? What tests have been done? What and who has done those tests? Is it independent? What are the results? Were there any interesting results that were in there that, may warrant further investigation? Or is it just a blanket statement that technology is advancing at a rapid rate and we just need to go with the flow?
What sort of hard facts have you come across about 5G? Because people seem to really not know, but know?
Exactly. Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, we know from thousands of studies that have been done that harm has been found already from the things we're currently exposed to, from our cell phones, from Wi-Fi. So we already know that, but that science is usually just not mentioned by the regulatory bodies and by our politicians, but it is there. Anybody can look at it. Anybody can see it. So there is an evidence base that has found harm. Yes, sure, there are studies that haven't found harm, but when you go in to look at those studies and you look at the money behind the studies, quite often they're industry linked or industry funded. So we know we have a body of scientific evidence that has found harm, and this harm is anything from cancer to neuropsychiatric to all sorts of things. So that's what we're currently exposed to. 5G is adding another, layer to that mix, number one. But number two, it hasn't had any biological safety testing. So if 5G is different, which it is, then we cannot rely on the science for 4G and Wi-Fi. Even if that science had found Wi-Fi and 4G, etc. to be safe, we would still need separate studies for 5G, and they haven't been done.
So there's been no studies?
Absolutely no biological safety tests done on the entire range of 5G with all its proposed range of frequencies, pulsations and nanopulsations. There are some studies that have been done on select frequencies within the 5G spectrum. So there are some things, and perhaps some of those studies haven't found harm. But those studies are not 5G, because 5G is a range of frequencies with a range of pulsations and nanopulsations. So you can't say 5G is safe because this one study on 60 gigahertz didn't find any damage to the eyes of rabbits or whatever. So that isn't proof. You need to look at the entire proposed range of frequencies with the pulsations and nanopulsations. Up until 4G, we've got the microwave spectrum. 5G is the millimeter wave. And so they say, oh, well, it's going to just be lightly dispersed in the outer layers of the skin. It's going to hit us as humans, but it's going to just cause some minor heating in the outer layers of the skin. What? And you're not going to test it? What? It's only going to cook you a little bit, but don't worry about it? You are saying that it is having a biological effect. If it's heating the outer layers of your skin, it is causing a biological response. What happens to humans when you are constantly being pulverized with a millimeter wave that heats the outer layers of your skin? What about babies? What about pregnant women? Because we know that the amniotic fluid transmits EMR at a higher density. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And so it's so easy to conveniently dismiss it as non-harmful because it can't be seen and it can't be heard. So one thing that I like to do with my activism is I have these little EMF measuring devices, and you can turn them on and it will show you that it's picking up something. So there is something there, and that really hits home to some people. We are electromagnetic beings. We are electromagnetic in our essence on a cellular level and beyond that. So of course we interact with these fields.
Here in our town, the overwhelming majority of people voted against, well, not voted, but they put in their non-consent essentially. We don't want that here. They're trying to go ahead and build it anyway. So they're not listening. Then with the emails that we send to Telstra, which is the company trying to put the 5G towers in, they send emails back saying, oh, thanks for voicing your concern. We're going ahead because our PANSA, which is the regulatory body here, says that it's safe. And then you send an email back saying, no, I didn't ask for that. I asked you for an independently verified test and study that shows that it's safe. No, our PANSA. I said, no, I don't want to hear about our PANSA. I said, I know who runs and owns our PANSA. And then they don't write back. So then what they're doing is they're censoring people from even just putting in their non-consent to the company that's trying to put in the 5G towers. So if it was safe, if it was effective, and if it was beneficial, wouldn't they be able to provide that? Wouldn't they be able to provide independent testing? Wouldn't they be open to a dialogue? If I have something that's of value to you, I don't need to force it on you, That's just a natural law. You don't need to force something onto somebody that's going to be a benefit, because they should be able to see it. You should be able to show it easily with transparency, and then they'll ask for it. They'll say, hey, look, that sounds great, I want that. Not the way they're doing it with 5G. So you only have to look at the way they're going about it to see that there's something hugely wrong with it.
About putting it out there, and if we don't say anything.
Yeah. Implied consent. Say Telstra, for example, they're like, the new Samsung Galaxy 20 whatever, or the new iPhone 50, it's 5G, it's gonna be the first and best 5G phone. That's them saying we're putting 5G out. but they're packaging it in a phone. They're like, whoa, I can watch Facebook faster than I can watch it now. I want 5G. That's what the average person's going to think. So they're saying we're putting 5G in, but they're packaging it within this phone, this gadget. It's going to be better. Your life's going to be way better because you can watch porn faster than you could before. You know, like it's a marketing thing. So it's here's the benefit. We've got this product, here's the benefit, and then most people want that. They go, yeah, I want something screwed into my brain. That my boss talked to me the other day. He said, Elon Musk has got this thing now where you can like screw it into your brain and it like fires off the neurons and you do these other things. And it sounds good because he's saying people who are vision impaired are gonna have better vision than a normal person. That sounds cool, right? To somebody that doesn't understand how the mind and the brain work and how it interacts with electricity, that sounds good. But if you've got an idea of what that is capable of doing outside of this benefit that it's going to give, it's like that's not a good idea. But most people don't look beyond that initial layer of look how cool this could be. And that's what they've done with 5G. So a lot of people want it. They think, oh, that sounds cool.
And even looking at the 5G grid, people think, oh, microchips and scanners and tracking you on your phone and all that stuff. Yeah, well, that's what they're doing. But 5G is simply a carrier wave. It's not anything that's you know, this evil thing. I mean, sure, it's radiation and it's bad, but it's the application of 5G. It's the fact that all DARPA weapon systems, active denial systems, and all of this, these are all 5G powered. It's a carrier wave for all that stuff. So ultimately, 5G is the carrier wave, the millimeter waves that 5G uses, which I think go from, and I might be wrong, so don't attack me, but I think it goes from 2.4 gigahertz to around 80 gigahertz is the spectrum these millimeter waves go through. You can do all sorts of stuff with that. There's talk about how you can excite oxygen molecules and all that. But even if you ignore all that, there's the terahertz signals that they use. Now, when you look at Bill Gates's concept for ID 2020 that he wants to bring in, proof of vaccination and all of this sort of thing that they want to do, that will be powered by the terahertz wave, the terahertz frequency. So what if they inject you with hydrogel? And then they use that 5G, because you've got the bandwidth to do it, because it's such a powerful bandwidth, that's why they want it everywhere. But then they use the terahertz waves to uplink you. So all your biometrics, everything, it's all there on demand all the time. So that's one of the applications of 5G. And that, by the way, that is 6G. The terahertz wave is 6G. And they're already talking about 6G and nobody really knows what it is. Well, that's what it is. It's the terahertz waves. So in that sort of a situation, because at the moment, we can say, well, I'm going to opt out of all this. I won't have a cell phone. I can't be tracked. I won't be part of this whole 5G system. But if they force you to have a vaccination and the vaccination has the hydrogel in it, which is going to uplink you anyway, then you're going to be in the system anyway through that interface that is in your body, and it's going to be fused into your cells. So it isn't like a microchip you can go and get removed. This will be fused into your cells, and if it's self-replicating, you don't know where it's going to go, how much of it it's going to take over your body. I mean, they could, God knows what they could do to us if you really want to get sci-fi about it. You know, they could have your whole body replaced by this stuff, you know, eventually, if it grows and does that. I mean, we're getting into the realms, like I said, of science fiction, depending on how far you want to take it and how far you think these people are prepared to take it. But the point is, if they manage to inject everybody with this hydrogel, which uplinks them already, then there'd be no opting out. And as I was saying when we were walking around outside before, like, for example, if you want to call an Uber, you won't have to pick up your phone and call an Uber. You'll just be able to walk outside and say Uber. And the hydrogel in your body will pick that up. The 5G carrier wave will be there. It will go to the nearest Uber driver and he'll show up at your door. He'll have facial recognition. He'll know what you look like. It'll all be there because the hydrogel will have all linked it all up together. And we're already hooked up. You know, so that means everything you say, everything you think, everything you do is being tracked. All of your biometrics are being tracked. If you're on any exotic drugs that are illegal, if you're smoking some weed or something like that, it's all in your biometrics. It's all picked up by the machine. This will be worse than being in any type of prison.
People have this perspective that we want to live in a perfect world. People who seek the truth, or people who oppose the government, or people who are labeled conspiracy theorists want to live in this perfect world, this dream world. And, you know, that's not realistic. We just want to have freedom. We want to have the right to speak and say what we want, as long as we're not hurting anyone, the right to have a choice of what goes in our body or what we decide to do in life.
What I would like to see as a change in this world is moving away from one narrative, one way of thinking, the prescribed government official story, because whether we like it or not, we will never be given the full story by our leaders and our governments. And so us as the people just taking back that power of our freedom to share our truth, our messages, our information without censorship is where we can live in a world where everybody gets to feel heard and seen, and moving away from one way, because there isn't one way. We live in a multicultural world now. We're globalized. Like, look at Australia. Like, if anything, we need to stop listening to the people in power and go back to First Nations people. But, you know, until then and moving forward, we all need to have the space to be heard and seen without ridicule and censorship, because that's not a democracy. And we're living in a fairy tale if we think that this is freedom. And, you know, it's really questionable who the true conspiracy theorists are.
How would you like to see the world change in a positive light? Mm-hmm. And how do you see it shifting into the world we the people want it to be?
I'm not certain whether there's going to be a utopia in our lifetime. I walk around the streets and shopping centres and airports, and it may not happen this while I'm around. You know, what would that take? An awakening of that level globally? I don't know. Maybe this is a small step.
I actually think it takes events like what we're seeing now. I think people are too comfortable otherwise. It's too easy to just turn on the TV, get informed by social media. I know what's going on in the world because Facebook told me. You know, it's too easy. It's too easy to go to a supermarket and get whatever comes off a shelf, as opposed to growing some food at home in your own garden beds and things. You have to care for that. You know, you can't not water it, you can't not look after it, you can't not move it around to the sun and things like that. So these are the little elements that people need to learn, and when people start doing that, that's how we're going to get to where a more positive and fruitful world is going to be. When people start to go, okay, look, we don't need these benefits and privileges that are given to us, we want our rights.
Start each day with a random act of kindness. Be as kind to people as you can, and it comes back to you. Be a joy to be around. Show people what a pleasure life is. Don't have them freaked out by what's going on. Just be aware of what's going on. You know, I've often said to people, you can have no stake in the outcome of this life, and if you step onto this path of activism, if you really want to get into it and really want to start looking deeply into what's going on in the world, it's a very dark place to look into. As the saying goes, enlightenment is a destructive process. It's a breaking down of everything you believe to be true. And if you don't want to see how black and dark things really are, don't look into the blackness to begin with. Because if you look deep enough, you're going to be shocked at what you're going to find. But I see a bright future if people are prepared to step up to the opportunity that this crisis is providing them. You know, not look for remedy from the source of the problem, which is government. You know, if they can understand the government has actually caused this problem and they've done it deliberately, and not go along with it and reconnect with their communities, put common unity back in the community. Like I said, we could change the world in a day. You know, if people just had that epiphany.
The project that we're involved with, Gunham and myself and a number of others, is called Nightcap Village Development. It's Nightcap on Minjunbal. This is Minjunbal territory, country, and we're in a joint venture with the tribe in relation to returning back to tribal ways, cultural ways, coming from the heart, do no harm, and respecting the mother, the sacred country that we're on. We're on a very sacred parcel of land here in northern New South Wales. It is around about 3,500 acres of land. We have significant resources all over it, unlimited water, unlimited power, sunshine. It's a community that's being built around the town that we already own, which is a town by the name of Mount Burrell here in northern New South Wales. And for us, it is our staging point for our expansion in the rest of the country to show people that you can actually live a completely different paradigm, and the reality is it's available to everyone. It's certainly within price point for most people. It's within understanding and concept. It comes back to heart, to nature. For us, this development is a sanctuary.
Everything we're doing is complying with the rules of the matrix. But what we're doing is we're offering within this cell that complies with the rules of the matrix, it's like a little bubble where people can actually have a little bit of freedom. It's a large enough estate. We can have community areas where we can do community things. We can be at peace with each other. The land here itself is an amazing place. It heals the soul. Well, how I see the world shifting is that thankfully people are waking up. This coronavirus bullshit has made a lot of people wake up to the fact that the governments are just feeding us shit. When you've got governments that'll sit back and let people like Bill Gates, who is a known associate of a raging pedophile, dictate terms to them, the people automatically will sit up and take notice and say, nah, not on my watch. What they've done now is they've become too blasé, and they've come out too early and they've exposed themselves too early. Their little one world government plan is not going to work, and that's their problem. That's something they have to deal with, and they can throw all the money and all the troops and all the rest of it they want to throw at it, but from this point in time on, they've woken the sleeping beast.
Yeah, I'd like to see that where people just still have freedom restored to them, where everybody's opinion is of value. That we can have an opinion, but we're not legislated against for that opinion.
They can't destroy the planet forever, or else they will destroy the planet. Yeah. So there will have to be a shift, and that shift will come as it's come with other injustices. And yeah, it's hearts and minds. Any war is won in hearts and minds. It doesn't matter if it's a war with guns or a war with pens, an information war or a military war. We have to stand our ground when it comes to human rights, and have humans as a right to eat good food and have a home, and also to travel freely and think and speak freely, and treat each other as other souls rather than being part of this bigger machine that doesn't belong to us.
Richie, this is something I wish I could see and depict the future and how this is going to play out. I don't think we're at our darkest days. I really feel that. I think there's a lot more darkness to come. I wish I was wrong. I hope I'm wrong with every fibre in my body. But I really believe there is so many more people that need to be enlightened and awake. And I don't think that's happened yet.
And I did a post about it the other day. If you don't believe me, go, research, prove me wrong. Okay? Because you know what happens? I win in the end. Because you stop listening to the media and say to yourself, I'm going to prove Romeo wrong. Whether you find out that I'm wrong or find out that I'm right, either way, I win because you've stopped relying on them and researched for yourself.
Most people are asleep. They are sound asleep. They're in a coma. They just don't realize it. They go through their lives day after day doing the same thing and just saying, if I have food on the table, if I have a roof over my head, all's well with the world. And I just think that people have to wake up, and they are starting to wake up because we have a slave mentality. We've gotten the government that we deserve. And the only way that we are going to change things is when we realize that we hold the power, not them. And because we've become complacent, because we've gone to elections and voted in the same old morons that we've always had, the same talking heads who know nothing about what they're saying and are simply following orders, we have this situation. It's time for us to realize that we are in this position because we've allowed it to happen.
Start looking at those little tiny steps. And when you start sleeping a bit better, when you start drinking more water, when you start eating more fresh fruit and vegetables, there's no coronavirus on them. When you start to exercise, your mind becomes clearer. And I believe when your mind becomes clearer, then you can start to see these things. And I say to people, take time to consider the world around you.
Oh, well, knowledge, yes. No, that's the key word. You see, as I said, ignorance is not bliss in any area, no matter what it is. Knowledge is very important, and that's why governments would provide education free of charge.
Each conversation we have, how we live our lives, how we are to ourselves. Are we violent towards ourselves? Do we put ourselves down? Do we criticize other people? Do we brush people aside that are closed-minded? That is equally as violent as someone who is, having a go at someone for being a conspiracy theorist. Is act as if, and then we start to resonate in that sort of way. Encourage people to look at things like peaceful cities, which is where thought, through meditation and aligning ourselves, we can start to resonate, and actually thoughts actually affect physical matter. The whole area of quantum science. Partner with people, ask them questions, invite them in. Don't preach it, tell people this is the right way, and just play your part. Where we put out energy is not always where it comes back. Sometimes people can't be that self-conscious in front of us. They don't want to go, well, maybe you have a point, because they've been part of this system. Plant the seeds, give people something to watch, to process in their own time, and come back and have a conversation about it.